Since leaving his post as Speaker of the House of Commons, now the retired Right Honourable John Bercow has decided to be more vocal about what he actually believes, which leads many to think perhaps he wasn't being as impartial as he believed he was. Evidence for this comes from a recent speech he gave, one of his first speeching engagements since leaving the Commons. During it, he labelled Brexit the biggest mistake of this country after the war, and that Brexit does not help us, and that it would be better to stay in the European Union. Now, if we wanted absolute certainty going forward, with no say over anything, then yes, we should definitely stay in the EU, because that way we have a guarantee of what we get, with no opportunity to improve and inevitable stagnation and breaking. Parliamentary rules state that John Bercow has to be impartial when in charge of proceedings in the Commons, but because of Brexit and how he has selected certain amendments, he has long faced accusations of bias because of it. The event he was at was a Foreign Press Association event, where he then finally set out his personal views along with mocking Boris Johnson, which is absolutely fine. Look at the guy. It's not hard to mock Boris. He was asked if he believed Brexit would affect the international standing of the United Kingdom, with him believing that it doesn't help the UK, which is when he then stated that Brexit's the biggest mistake of this country after the war, with him also adding that while he respects Boris Johnson, Brexit doesn't help us and it's better to be part of the EU power bloc. I would argue no, because the whole premise of us staying originally was to renegotiate and rebuild the EU, rejuvenate it, make it into something better for everyone, affect change if you will. But it was proven utterly immovable, so we were right to move away. If this doesn't, in some way, his comments that is, trigger the Brexiteer MPs in Parliament, I'd be very surprised. I think for many it would confirm their suspicions and lead to them more than likely pushing for inquiries, because where the Brexiteers get their leg to stand on originates from the referendum itself, when in 2017, a year after, he told a group of students he voted Remain. As Speaker at the time, he really shouldn't have said that. Many suggested at the time that he was helping to block Brexit, and that what he did instead, he insists anyway, was for MPs to implement the referendum result and not him. When interviewed by the Daily Mail, one unnamed Brexiteer MP said, "In other breaking news, the Pope is in charge of the church in Rome." It was perfectly obvious that he had those views the whole time he was in the chair. Many of the decisions he made were clearly in favour of people who wanted to slow down Brexit. When we look at the amendments that he regularly chose to be voted on and debated, and then voted on and debated and voted on and debated, depending on how many times they could bring the same thing back, but with a different signature, his record as Speaker is somewhat tarnished, because it does show a bias, something he was flayed for on one of his final days as Speaker. Now, he was very courteous in his responses, but it cannot be denied Brexit will be his legacy as a biased bully. One of the last comments Boris Johnson made as a tribute during the last PMQ stream to John Bercow was that he was not just an umpire, but also a player in his own right, because regularly Bercow would intervene, and on one occasion he was in fact the deciding vote on something that actually made it even harder for the government, which showed a political bias because it concerned a Brexit amendment. When the Supreme Court ruled the prorogation of Parliament unlawful, Bercow did say, "What matters is 11-0. Maybe it's not clear 11-0, forgetting that the majority of the Supreme Court justices have vested interests and finances and property in continental Europe, so understandably they wouldn't want to, regardless, vote in favour of the government. Upon closer inspection of the government's argument, it all comes down to whether or not the Queen could make an informed decision. I find it fascinating that 11 judges decide over her." As John Bercow is no longer an MP, because he had to resign that along with his party membership when he joined as a Speaker, it'll be very interesting now to see what comes of the former Buckingham MP, and I am truly curious to see what he does next, because chances are it's going to be a book, and chances are he's going to continue showing his bias now, his opinion, which will lead many to believe there is a bias.